This podcast is brought to you by Contessa Digital.
You know what's crazy to me? The fact that one decision that we make at one split second, one snapshot of our lives can affect the rest of our lives in so many ways. It can affect our career opportunities. It can affect our friendship circles, our love lives, our family lives, just everything from one decision. And it was in therapy recently that a memory came to me of one of those decisions that I made, that this decision brought so many blessings to my life, and it also held me back in so many ways as well. And I wanted to tell you this story because I keep seeing this happen to so many women in my sphere, whether that is women I'm friends with or female relatives, my clients, other women on social media. I keep seeing this happen, and I'm hoping that if I tell you my story, not only will you relate, but maybe this story will free you from some of the stories that you're telling yourself. So, love, welcome to Confidently Cherished. My name is Keshia Rice. I am a dating coach for ambitious women of faith. And the story that I want to tell you is the time that I decided to be in a pageant. And I know that you just heard that and you're probably like, pageant, like that's that's nothing. How does a decision like that really affect your life the way you're claiming it did? But it really did. It changed a lot of the stories that I was telling myself in my teenage years, and those stories carried from a decision that, a 16-year-old girl made definitely into my mid-20s, but to some extent now as well. And to understand how this decision affected me, I need to back up to why I decided to be in a pageant in the first place. When I was in high school, I was that I was that kid who did everything, who was in everything, who was the A student, who was supposed to graduate high school and take over the world, complete overachiever, that type. I'm a preacher's kid. So in church, I was singing on the choir, and we had a dance team, and I worked on the kitchen staff, and I was a Sunday school teacher, and I was an usher, saying all of this stuff. Even saying all of it, I feel exhausted. And that was just the church stuff. In school, I was in honors classes, and I was an A student, and I wrote for our newspaper, and I was in honor society, and I did volunteer work, and I was in marching band, and this is ridiculous. I did so many activities that it is actually slipping my mind all of the things that I did. Maybe I should have pulled out a yearbook before I started recording this episode, but that was kind of the problem. I saw myself talking about stories. I saw myself as this overachieving perfectionist nerd who only did nerdy things. And when I was applying for colleges, my dad made it very clear that he and my mom did not save up any money for me to go to college, and that I was going to need to figure out a way to pay for college. So when I started applying for schools, there was a lot of pressure because I was just like, I wasn't worried about getting into college, but I was definitely worried about how am I going to get the scholarship money to pay for tuition and room and board and all those things. So I was looking at my resume and I was like, I need something to show that I'm well-rounded, that I'm not just this nerd. There's, tons of nerds apply for colleges. I need something that stands out. And I ended up deciding to enter into my high school's pageant because I was like, that'll show that I'm something different, right? That I'm not just brains, I'm beauty as well. I entered this pageant. I went through all the rehearsals, the competition, all of that. And no, I did not win. But I did place. I got in third place. And, when I think now of a lot of the things that happened in the years after high school, so, the college years, early 20 years, all that, I realize how a lot of decisions I made connected back to that decision in good ways and bad. The good was, doing a pageant was really out of my comfort zone. Just completely out of it. I never saw myself as that girl. You know what I mean? So when I made the decision to be in a pageant, and then when I ended up placing, I was very happy that night. It didn't matter to me that I didn't win because I wasn't expecting to place. I was expecting to fail fantastically at that and just put it on my resume as something that I tried to do. So when I ended up placing, it emboldened me in a lot of ways. I already had a bit of an adventurous side. By the time I graduated high school, I had done some traveling. I had been to 4 countries, I believe, at that point. So, the travel experience I had, plus doing something like that pageant and, not doing terribly at it, it emboldened me to try new things, to take more risk. And I will forever be grateful for that. On the other hand, there is something that happened the night of that pageant that I've never talked about. And that was the fact that after it was all over with, someone, a woman, came to me and she told me that I should feel very proud of myself because I wasn't that girl. That I most certainly was not a beauty queen. That I definitely was not the type of girl who stole the spotlight. And because of that, I should feel very proud of myself for having placed in that competition. And, there was something about that comment. I'm not that type of girl. I'm not meant for the spotlight. That really kept sticking with me. I think about when I was in college. So, at this point I have more than one degree. But the first time I went to college, I was a journalism major, and I decided that I wanted to go into TV news. And I had made that decision by the time this pageant had come around, that I was doing TV news. And I wanted to be a reporter, I wanted to be on air. But getting to college and seeing other women in my classes, I started to have these thoughts of I can't really compete. I'm not as pretty as some of these other girls. Of course, they're going to end up with on-air jobs and not me. And I tried to make myself stand out in other ways. Like, for a while, I was really determined that I would go into sports journalism because, not as many women, therefore, in my mind, not as much competition, right? And then I get to my senior year of college, and one of my professors said something to me that was a very valid point, but because of the stories in my head, I took it a different way. He came to me and he told me that he knew that I had an interest in being in front of the camera, but he told me that it was producers, the ones who were behind the scenes, that really make a lot more decisions about what content gets on air. That, it's the producers who make more decisions about how much play a story gets, how high up in the newscast it goes. It's producers who are true leaders. And he told me that, I was a Black woman and that newsrooms needed more diversity in leadership, and that he really thought I would be better off if I focused on producing, that doing so would be the best way that I could help my community. And looking back now, I totally understand what he was trying to say. But again, this was in college. So this was after my whole high school experience and after that woman, after that woman made those comments to 16-year-old me. And I'm sorry, just when I say that now, like, I think about the fact that there's currently a 3 at the front of my age, and all that I've learned from my own journey with seeing therapists, seeing coaches, and then becoming a coach myself. When I think about how much words matter and how she said that to someone who was at the time such a young and vulnerable age, it pisses me off, honestly. But never mind. So, those two experiences kind of got linked in my head. And when this professor was encouraging me to be a producer for what was very valid reasons, I kind of internalized that as, once again, you're not that girl. You belong behind the scenes. So that's what I did. The risk taker in me graduated college and literally applied for jobs all over the world. I was ready for the adventure. And after applying for jobs all over the world, my first degree was at the University of South Carolina. I ended up getting my first job in Columbia, South Carolina. So I didn't go very far. But, the story that I had about not being that girl, I did end up sending my resume in for some on-air jobs, it was as a backup. I graduated during a terrible economy, so I was applying to whatever news job there was, But, of course, that story about not being that girl, belonging behind the camera, behind the scenes, I ended up taking a producer job. And not that I regret that, because, I've had the opportunity. I had an amazing career as a journalist. I covered some great stories, worked for national news networks, was nominated for 2 Emmys. So in that sense, turned out not to be a bad idea at all, right? But again, this whole story of not being that girl affected more than my career because, on one hand, I'll never know what would have happened had I pursued the on-air track. And also, that whole idea of like I was the behind the scenes girl affected my dating life too. It affected my relationships. For the longest time, when I was thinking about my, when I was thinking about my past relationships as boyfriends I had, And in case you can't tell, I've been doing a lot of unpacking lately. Um, my therapist and I were talking about the fact that healing is like a spiral staircase. So, you constantly keep going, you keep coming back to the same point over and over again, but you come to it as you heal at different levels. So, there's something that happens to you that hurts you, and you heal one aspect of it, and then you come back to it again at a different level and heal that aspect. And I would say this year, especially the past 4 or 5 months, I have definitely been coming to the same point on certain issues at higher levels. And so I've done a lot of introspection, a lot of thinking about these different stories that I was telling myself and how they led to different decisions I made in my life. So again, even in the way that I dated, I think about the men that I dated, particularly in college and also a little bit in my early 20s. And I was always the support behind the scenes girlfriend. You know what I mean? I dated guys who were very sociable, who were very extroverted, even more so than I was, which is amazing because I'm an extreme extrovert. But I dated guys who liked talking and being around people and getting attention even more than I did. And, I dated these men and I was always like the backbone, the support. You know what I mean? I was the quiet girlfriend. I was the supportive girlfriend. They needed help with building themselves up, with building their careers up. That's what I was there for. Like, I was very much on my Olivia Pope is handled game, right? I knew how to upgrade men. I knew how to make their lives better. I knew how to help them achieve their goals. And in the meantime, yes, I was accomplishing things. I've always been an ambitious person. So I had my own dreams and my own goals, and I was accomplishing things. But at the same time, there was always a little bit of me putting aside things that I wanted, things that I desired, so that I could be the supportive girlfriend. Because again, I wasn't that girl, right? I wasn't the girl in the spotlight. I was the one who is behind the scenes supporting. That was the story I kept telling myself. I even think of, I had healed a lot of this by the time I met my husband, because spiral staircase, right? So by the time my husband and I met, I had gone through several rounds of this whole thing with healing that story that I did not deserve to shine, or I wasn't meant to shine. But even when he and I got married, or when we got engaged, at that point is when I began my coaching business. And even then, I hit this wall again, because maybe you are finding me from this podcast, right? But there's a good chance that you found me through either Instagram or TikTok, which, if you don't follow me there, shameless plug, I am at Keshia Rice, KeshiaRice. But, when I started my business, I got a business coach, and she was like, okay, well, now it's time for you to put yourself out there and to post all over social media. Let people know that you're in business. Let people know who you can help, what it is that you do. And I resisted that so much. I kept looking for ways to post content without showing my face, without posting any pictures of myself, because I was not that girl, right? I was not the girl who shone, who was in the spotlight. That wasn't me. especially at that point, because by the time I became a coach, I had been a producer for years. So, my career was behind the scenes, and I don't do, being in front. Even when I started this podcast, my podcast was supposed to start on one day. I had set a date for it. I had made the goal and everything. I was like, hey, I'm going to start recording episodes and put this out there. I have to look up the first day an episode of this podcast aired, but I can tell you for a fact that the first day this podcast aired was between 18 months and 2 years after I had originally said it was going to air. And the reason why was because I had so many limiting beliefs about putting myself out there in the form of a podcast and being in the spotlight. That was, in 2023, you will start hearing more episodes with me and with guests. I plan to start up doing some interviews again. But when I originally started this podcast, the reason why there were guests was because I was terrified of doing an episode by myself. I thought no one would want to hear me. And this was at a time where I already had like more than 10,000 followers on Instagram. So obviously people were following me and watching me and listening to me. But I was just so convinced that there was no way this podcast would get listeners if it was just me talking. And I'm telling you this because I've done years and years of work to heal myself from this, right? Like, that's why you're listening to me now. It's because I've done so much work to heal from this. But I keep seeing it again in other women about the stories they keep telling themselves. And especially as it comes to dating and relationships, this is why so many women are either single, and I mean unhappily single. I'm not talking about the women who want to be single, but there are so many women who are either unhappily single or B, unhappily in relationships, not really getting what they want because of these stories. There's the stories that society tells us. Good girls don't complain. Good girls keep their mouth shut. Good girls are submissive. And you see all these relationships of women who, when they are single, they are, just badass women. They are so independent and free thinking and creative and just doing the thing, right? But they get in relationships, and because of all these stories about how a girlfriend or a wife is supposed to act, you see them shrink their personalities. You see them humble themselves. Like, the man doesn't even have to humble them. They humble themselves. They stop asking for what they want. They stop speaking up. Their boundaries and standards go out the window, and they take whatever someone gives them because they think that that's how it's supposed to be. They're told that they have to put up with things. They're told stupid things like all men cheat, which is so not true. There are so many loyal, faithful men out there, but they hear all these stories and they allow these stories to sink into them. I think about, I can't even believe I'm bringing this up because I've tried to stay out of that drama. But I think about Derek Jackson, right? Who is a dating coach. I remember seeing his post about dating and relationships when I first joined Instagram years ago. And I don't know if he's still a dating coach and still giving advice, considering that he was caught multiple times cheating on his wife. And now, as of the recording of this episode, he is filing for divorce from her and apparently already spending time with other women. But, it's not even about him. I think about right now his still wife, soon to be ex-wife, Danae Jackson. And if you look at pictures of her from before they got married and when they first got married, Danae Jackson was a baddie. Like, she was cute. She had a good sense of style, wore really cute clothes. And by the time it came out that Derek Jackson had cheated on her, she appears with him in one of those stupid apology videos. And she looks frumpy. She's wearing a bonnet in the video. She's not very dressed up, no makeup. And he's there, he obviously took the time to make himself look good, but she doesn't. She looks very, very basic. I'm not saying this as an insult to her, but compared to what she had looked like years earlier, she definitely looked very basic. And then you look at other pictures of their relationship and you see over time, it's not just that she was a Christian wife who became more modest, right? Like, I see that sometimes. You see a woman who thinks that because she's a wife, she has to have higher necklines and things like that. But she lost all sense of style. And I honestly think all sense of herself, because she was behaving in the way the stories told her this is what a wife does, right? A wife is humble and quiet, stays out the way, and stands by her man, even when he does absolutely outrageous, unforgivable crap, right? And, I think about those stories that are told in society, like this is how a woman is supposed to act. And I think about the stories that women tell themselves, that all men cheat, or that the dating pool is full of pee, or they tell themselves that, a good man isn't going to want a woman like her because of her past. I can even think, I've lived in a couple of large cities, so I think I can say this vaguely enough without giving away too many details. But I remember a while ago, I had a friend, and this friend and I both had a crush on, I'm trying to keep this very vague. We both had a crush on a certain professional athlete. So it was strange, because we both kept having all these discussions, because this athlete led a fairly public life, right? So we would constantly see him, on social media, on the blogs, sometimes in the news, whatever, with different women. And I remember, like, she kept making all these comments about how she didn't understand why men like that, who had money and power and fame and stuff like that, didn't want down-to-earth girls like us. They didn't want women who would actually appreciate them and who would help them manage their money instead of spending it all on frivolous things. And, instead they want it to be with, I'm going to use her phrase here, gold digging hoes is what she said. And the crazy thing about her saying those things and me agreeing with her in conversation, because I do think it's crazy, because I think those perceptions are wrong. I've personally dated very wealthy men, and, I know wealthy men. I have friends who have been with wealthy men, and, just like men with less money, different men have different types. So the idea that that an entire group of men only wants this type of woman, I know from personal experience, is ridiculous. Like, yes, as a coach, I can talk to you about the psychology behind it, but from personal experience, I know that that's ridiculous. And not only that, but because of connections that I had at that time, I actually ended up meeting this guy. And remember, I had a crush on him too. So I ended up meeting this guy and having a conversation with him. And we actually hit it off pretty well. We talked for a little bit. He even asked for my number, like all this. And talking about the stories that get in our heads, I convinced myself that that was a complete and total fluke. I convinced myself that he was only nice to me because he thought he had to be nice to me. I convinced myself that if he wanted to talk to me, it was just because of my background working in media, and that he was just going to use me to get some advice or everything. I convinced myself that there was no way he could have any genuine interest in me. And I see this happen so often with women that I work with, that they have all of these stories for why a healthy, happy relationship with a true high value man is not in the cards for them. And I do mean high value man, not just high earning. Derek Jackson is high earning with the books that he sells. I'm talking about someone who is stable, financially, emotionally, mentally, all of that. Someone who is compassionate, who is kind, who is loving, who really and truly values and cherishes having a great partner. That's what I mean by high value man. But I see women holding themselves back from these relationships because of the stories that they told themselves about men or about how society works. I think of the fact that I'm in an interracial marriage, and I'm also married to someone who is younger than I am. And I know women who, because of the stories they've been told, won't even consider those things as an option. They would never date someone who was even, 5 months younger than them, furthermore, 5 years, right? They would never date outside of their race because they're told, the story that's been told to them is that they have to be loyal to that they can't open their options and expand their options. And I think about how women, because of the stories they tell themselves, will either sabotage good relationships because they don't think they deserve them, or they will sabotage the potential for a relationship, or even if that relationship is not the love of their lives. So in the case of this pro athlete, no, I don't think he would have been the love of my life because, I'm married to mine, right? But who knows? Maybe it could have been a couple of dates or something, and it could have turned into something that was fun. It could have turned into a great story to tell my grandkids one day, right? But, to quote Kanye West, I guess we'll never know, right? But I say this because I see women who end up in situations like that, where they turn down, they end up in a worse consequence than I did. They turn down someone who truly could have been that person for them because they don't think that they're deserving, or they stay in bad relationships because they think that that's all they're worth, or they refuse to put themselves in environments where they can be in a great relationship. I talk to my clients about this all the time. If you want to be in a healthy relationship with someone who is high value, you need to spend time in environments with high value people. You need to check this person to see if they're doing high value activities. Someone who networks, someone who goes to therapy, someone who's healing themselves. But they continue to spend their time around men who are not doing anything to improve their lives, around men who are happy living at the bottom and have no ambitions of going higher. And then they wonder, why do I keep meeting men who aren't aligned with my values? Well, because you refuse to leave that environment, because some of the stories that you're telling yourself are keeping you in that environment and you refuse to move past it, right? And they're telling themselves all these stories about their unworthiness. And then listening to all these stories about how, God forbid, if you're still dating when you're in your insert whatever age is trendy right now, if you're in your late 20s, if you're in your early 30s, if you're in your mid 30s, beyond, whatever, that you've hit some sort of wall, some imaginary wall, and that now you must settle for whoever is around. Like, also not true. Don't get me wrong. Most of the women who come to me are in their 20s and 30s. And, I've helped them meet their husbands, in their 20s and 30s. And yes, in the United States, at least, for now, the average age for a woman getting married is 29. But just because that's average doesn't mean it's everyone's story. At the same time, I know plenty of women who aren't interested in marriage, right? And they only want to date, and they have lots of choices and options. They have very active, busy dating lives in their 40s and into their 50s. I know women who desire marriage and they end up getting married in their 40s and their 50s. This idea that a certain age makes you undesirable couldn't be further from the truth. Well, it is true if you're dealing with men who are manipulative and controlling. Those men will only want very young women because they want to hook women while they're stupid. But believe me when I say that, again, personal experience, I know high value men, truly high value men, not just high earning, who, first of all, there's some who are still single in their 30s, 40s, 50s because they haven't met the right woman yet. And honestly, most of them want to be with women who are their age. They're not interested in dating someone who's half their age. So this whole idea that a woman hits a wall is ridiculous. Like, women don't hit any more walls than men do. But again, what are the stories that you're telling yourself? What are the stories that you're telling yourself about love and happiness in general? I have one client in particular who we have spent a lot of time working together on not the fact that she doesn't believe that she's deserving of a great man, or, not that she doesn't believe she's not attractive or anything. She knows she can meet great men. She knows that she is an attractive woman and that men take interest in her. But the story that has held her back for so long is this idea that her family is cursed and that none of the women in her family are ever happy, are ever going to be happy. And she had to deal with so much stuff, right? So much mental stuff over the idea of whether it was possible for her to be happy, and then whether or not she would feel guilty if she found happiness because her mother and grandmother and great grandmother, they were never happy with their love lives. And we tell ourselves these stories, and what starts off as something that's very innocent, an offhand comment made to a 16-year-old after a pageant. It's a small moment, right? In the great, annals of history, no one's going to write about that. If the time comes where someone writes a biography about me, or if I decide to write my own memoirs one day, that moment probably won't be brought up. Someone, 1,000 years from now would have to dig up this podcast episode for it to ever become a thing, right? But it's these things that happen in the tiny and seemingly insignificant moments that we allow to become stories for the rest of our lives. And as you are doing some reflection right now, I really want you to take some time to think about that. Seriously, think about the patterns in your life, the goals, the dreams that you have, but that you've yet to accomplish. And it doesn't even have to be about your love life. Like, I would love for you to think about some love goals because, it's kind of my jam, kind of what I do. But not just your love life, your career, your finances, all of that. Think about the patterns in your life and the ones that you're not happy with. What are the stories that you're telling yourself for you to not have the life that you want yet? And where did those stories start? What was the seemingly innocent, nothing burger, like no big deal moment that set off a chain that led you to tell these unhealthy, unproductive stories to yourself? Just give that some thought. And if you want to share those stories, I would love to know. You don't have to do it publicly. Although if you want to, I do think that is a great way to make a resolution happen since we're coming up on the beginning of a new year very soon, to make a public statement of like, hey, this is something I've been telling myself and no longer. I'm publicly saying this for accountability. I will no longer believe this and I will change into a more productive outlook on life. But if you want to share those with me privately, I'm on Instagram. You can DM me and just let me know. What are those stories that are holding you back? And what do you plan to do about them? So that's some food for thought. And I want you to know that, again, I love you so much. And I hope that whenever you end your day, I don't know when you're listening to this, but I hope that when you do end your day, you will think about this episode and you will spend your time before you drift off to sleep. You will take the time to tell yourself a more empowering bedtime story. Love you. I will talk to you soon. Bye. Hey there. So you made it all the way to the end of the episode, which means I have two things to say. One, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And two, you like me. You really like me. So I would appreciate it if you would show that like by subscribing to this podcast so that more people can hear about it and enjoy it as much as you do. And if you want to know more about any of the links that I mentioned on this episode or any guests that I've had, be sure to go to KeshiaRice.com/links. That's KeshiaRice.com/links. I can't wait to talk to you again in the next episode. So see you then.